Something is standing in your doorway. You cannot see its face. You are not sure it even has one. What you can see is the outline, 7 feet tall, maybe more, pressed into the frame of the door like it grew there. It is not moving. It is not making a sound. The room has gone cold, even though it is the middle of July. You blink. It is gone. 3 days later, someone you love is dead. This is one of the oldest, most persistent accounts in all of American folklore. Passed down for generations across the ridges and hollows of Appalachia. A figure with no name that everyone seems to know. They call it the Tall Man. The Appalachia mountain range stretches from Alabama and Georgia all the way north into Canada. It is among the most ancient on Earth, formed roughly 300 million years ago. These are not young, dramatic peaks like the Rockies. These mountains have been worn down by time into something darker and quieter. For thousands of years, people have lived deep inside them, and for thousands of years, they have been telling the same stories. The isolation of Appalachian communities cannot be overstated. Well into the 20th century, many families in the deep hollows of West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, and the mountains of Tennessee lived without regular contact with the outside world. Roads were poor or non-existent. Towns were far. Neighbors were measured in ridgelines, not blocks. In that kind of isolation, oral tradition thrives. Stories told in 1890 were still being told in 1970, in the same words with the same details. That consistency is part of what makes Appalachian folklore so unusual. It did not drift the way urban legends drift. It stayed. And across that tradition, in collections of oral histories, in folklore journals, in the personal testimonies of mountain families, one figure appears again and again. Tall, dark, and featureless, standing at thresholds, witnessed in the hours before death. The Tall Man in Appalachian belief is not a demon. He is not a ghost in the traditional sense. He does not haunt a location. He does not want anything from you that you have not already given. He is a harbinger, a death omen. Something between a warning and a witness, present at the edge of a life that is about to end. To understand how this figure came to be, you have to understand where Appalachian folklore itself came from. It is not a single tradition. It is a collision. When Scots-Irish settlers pushed into the mountain interiors in the 1700s and 1800s, they brought with them a rich and dark spiritual worldview inherited from the British Isles. In Scottish and Irish folk belief, the boundary between the living and the dead was not a wall. It was a membrane, thin in certain places, permeable at certain hours. Doorways, windows, thresholds, the spaces between rooms, these were considered liminal zones. Transitional spaces where the rules of the physical world became unreliable. And within that worldview lived a category of spirit known, broadly, as a death watcher, a figure or presence that appeared at thresholds in the period immediately before a death in the household. It did not cause the death. It arrived because the death was already coming. These settlers did not arrive in an empty land. The Cherokee had lived in these mountains for centuries, and within Cherokee spiritual belief existed figures associated with death and the dying that carry unmistakable similarities to what would later be called the Tall Man. The Kalona Ialiski, known in English as the Raven Mocker, is among the most feared entities in Cherokee tradition. It is a spirit that preys upon those who are already dying, drawn to sickness and weakness, arriving unseen at the homes of the ill. In Cherokee belief, only a medicine man could detect its presence. It could not be perceived by ordinary people until it had already arrived. The connection to the tall, featureless shadow that appears before death in later Appalachian accounts is not accidental. These belief systems lived side by side in the same mountains, and they bled into one another. The third stream comes from the haint traditions of the American South. The word haint is a regional pronunciation of haunt, and while it is sometimes used loosely to mean any ghost, in its older and more specific usage, a haint is something distinct. It is a restless, unsettled spirit, not necessarily the dead returning, but something older and more intentional, something with purpose. Haint traditions acknowledge a spirit world that overlaps with the physical one, and they take doorways and thresholds with particular seriousness. This is why Appalachian homes, especially older ones, so often feature haint blue painted on porch ceilings and window frames, a tradition meant specifically to prevent spirits from crossing into the home. Blue was believed to confuse spirits, to mimic the sky or water, both barriers the dead cannot pass. The fact that this practice existed and was taken seriously for generations tells you something about how real the threat felt. These three traditions, Scottish and Irish threshold spirits, Cherokee death watchers, and Southern haint folklore, converged over 2 centuries in one of the most isolated regions in America. And what emerged from that convergence was the Tall Man. The descriptions recorded from Appalachian oral histories are remarkably consistent across different counties, different states, and different decades. Witnesses describe a figure that is disproportionately tall, most accounts placing it between 7 and 9 feet in height. In homes and hallways where it appears, it is said to duck or compress itself, bending in ways that suggest its true size is larger than the space it occupies. Its silhouette is human in shape, but not quite human in proportion. Limbs that are slightly too long, a frame that is slightly too narrow, a stillness that is unlike the stillness of a person standing quietly, because a person standing quietly still has the micro movements of breathing and weight shifting that we perceive even when we are not consciously aware of them. The tall man does not have these. He is simply still in the way that objects are still. His face, in virtually every account, is not visible, not obscured by shadow or covered by clothing, but absent, a darkness where features should be. Witnesses do not describe feeling that they cannot see the face because of lighting. They describe feeling that there is nothing there to see. He appears in specific places, never in the center of a room, always in transitional spaces, doorways, hallways, at the foot of a staircase, at the edge of a bed in the corner where a wall meets a wall. These are all threshold spaces in some sense, places between one room and another, between one floor and another, between the sleeping and the waking, between one life and what comes after it. The conditions reported before his appearance follow a pattern. Witnesses describe waking suddenly, not gradually, but with the abrupt clarity of someone who has been woken by a sound, except there is no sound. The house is completely quiet. This is described as an unnatural quiet, not the ordinary quiet of a sleeping household, but the kind of silence where even ambient noise seems to have been removed. No wind, no animals. No settling of the wood in the walls, and then the cold. Even in the heat of Appalachian summers, witnesses describe a drop in temperature so pronounced that they could see their breath. And then in the doorway, the figure. The encounters are brief. Seconds most of the time. The witness blinks or looks away and the figure is gone. There is no sound of movement. No indication of a direction. Just presence and then absence and then the ordinary sounds of the world returning. What follows, in account after account, is a death. A woman in eastern Kentucky woke to find the figure standing in her bedroom doorway. Her husband died the next morning of a heart attack at the mine. A farmer in West Virginia reported the figure at the foot of his bed. His mother died unexpectedly 2 days later. A man in rural Tennessee saw it in the hallway of his family home, standing motionless. His daughter was killed in an automobile accident within the week. These accounts were not collected under dramatic circumstances. They were gathered by folklorists doing routine oral history work, recorded in community archives, shared on folklore forums, or passed down in families as warnings. The people telling them were not seeking attention. Many of them were reluctant to speak about it at all, because in Appalachian tradition, talking about the tall man is considered something you do carefully, not casually. Many Appalachian families treat the tall man not as a story to be shared freely, but as a subject approached with caution, the way you might speak carefully about a serious illness. There is no folklore tradition surrounding how to call him, how to repel him, or how to change the outcome once he appears. Unlike the haint, which can be warded off with haint blue or other protections, the tall man is not believed to be something you can stop. He does not come to threaten. He comes because the threshold is already opening. That distinction matters. In most paranormal traditions, the presence of a supernatural entity carries the implication of agency, of intention toward the living. The tall man carries none of that. He is not there for you. You are simply present in a house where he has arrived for someone else. The terror of the encounter does not come from what he does. It comes from what his presence means. Researchers who have studied Appalachian death beliefs note that the tall man fits within a broader cross-cultural pattern of personified death omens. Every major human civilization has developed some version of this figure. The Irish banshee, a wailing woman whose voice is heard before a family member dies. The Enku of Breton folklore in France, a skeletal figure in a black cloak and wide-brimmed hat who arrives to collect souls, making no distinction between rich and poor. The Grim Reaper of broader Western tradition, itself an amalgam of older death figure archetypes. In Japan, certain categories of Yurei serve similar functions. In Norse mythology, the Valkyries were dispatched to the sites of deaths that had already been decided. Across every culture and every era, human beings have needed to give form to the moment when death is imminent. And that form remarkably often is tall, dark, silent, watching from a threshold. What the Appalachian tall man adds to this global tradition is specificity. He is not abstract, he is domestic. He is standing in your house, in your hallway, at the door of your bedroom. This is not death on a battlefield or death in the wilderness. This is death that knows your address. In the 21st century, accounts of the tall man have not disappeared. They have migrated from oral tradition into online forums, personal blogs, and paranormal communities, where they exist alongside similar accounts from people who have never heard of Appalachian folklore. There is a phenomenon that researchers have been attempting to categorize for decades, commonly referred to as shadow people or the Hat Man, in which individuals across widely different cultural backgrounds report seeing tall, featureless dark figures, often in doorways, often in the moments before or after a significant event. Sleep researchers have offered sleep paralysis as an explanation for many of these accounts, noting that the hypnagogic state between waking and sleep can produce vivid hallucinations of presence, often perceived as threatening. This is a legitimate explanation for some of what is reported, but it does not fully account for the tall man as he appears in Appalachian tradition. Sleep paralysis experiences are typically characterized by an inability to move and a sense of crushing pressure. The majority of tall man accounts describe witnesses who were fully mobile, who woke cleanly, who in some cases left their beds and moved through the house. And sleep paralysis does not explain the deaths that follow. What it does suggest is that the human brain may have a consistent, cross-cultural response to the proximity of death, one that manifests as a perception of a tall, dark, watching figure. Whether that perception is purely neurological, or whether it points to something that exists independently of the human mind, is a question that no one has answered. The mountain families who have lived with this story for generations are not particularly interested in that debate. They do not need the tall man to be explained. They need to know what to do if he appears, and the answer that has been passed down through the hollows and across the ridges for 200 years is simple and devastating. There is nothing to do. He is not there because something is wrong. He is there because something is ending. And endings, in the old Appalachian view of the world, are not accidents and not mistakes. They are arrivals. Something that has been in motion for a long time finally reaching its destination. If you wake tonight and the house is quiet in the wrong way, and the room has gone cold without reason, and something tall and dark and still is standing in the space between where you are and where the hall begins, do not call out to it. Do not approach it. Do not try to make sense of what you are seeing. Look away, and in the morning, check on the people you love. Subscribe to Paranormal Depths for the strangest and most compelling cases from around the world.